In this video, I'm taking my level 1 party into Act 2 on Baldur's Gate 3's hardest difficulty. If you want to watch Act 1 first, click the link in the pinned comment. If you're worried about spoilers, this video only shows gameplay up to the moment that Steam gives you an achievement for leaving Act 2. But holy crap, Act 2 was hard. And since it was so hard, I can tell you right now, if you don't like seeing cheesy gameplay, then this video isn't for you. Because at one extreme, I'm using an infinite turn exploit, and at the other extreme, I went AFK for 20 minutes, and when I came back, the boss was about to die. Also, this is the only gameplay I've ever done in Act 2, so if you notice I didn't get an overpowered item or take on a difficult fight, it's because I don't know it exists. But I'd love to learn more, so please leave me a comment to tell me what I missed out on. I'm heading into the Shadow-Cursed lands, where you need a source of light to be safe from the shadows, and Karnas, the weird spider drow mix thing, has a special moon lantern. Although Shadowheart can go out a little bit on her own as long as it's not too dark and she doesn't actually need a torch. And that came in handy when I came across an ambush, and thankfully one of my party members succeeded on the perception check. I sent Shadowheart around on her own in order to get behind the ambush, and I set up a smoke powder barrel behind the two that were on the really high ground and blew them straight off the edge to start the fight. This inflicted the surprised condition onto the ambushers, so they didn't get to take a turn in combat, and we completely wiped them out without them having a chance to fight back at all. The majority of my best spells are actually coming from items that I have equipped at this point, but I do try to use them sparingly so I don't have to long rest too often. I reached Moonrise Tower and was given my own moon lantern, and I headed to the mausoleum so I could learn the secret to Ketheric Thorm's immortality. Inside the mausoleum, I found 3 reconstituted skeleton soldiers, and I prepared for a fight. It turns out they were on my side, but the shadows that came to attack us were certainly not. And the shadows were a lot stronger than my allies were. I had Shadowheart cast Sanctuary on herself so I could just observe the fight and see what happened, and I just waited until the little portals had spit out all the skeletons they possibly could, which left me with like 11 skeleton soldiers that I needed to find a way to take care of. By the way, in Act 1 I put a pretty heavy emphasis on Lae'zel and trying to make sure that I explored her story, and in Act 2 I'm going to put an emphasis on Shadowheart. For the most part, I want to let her story play out the way that she wants it to. Back to the fight, I made a wall of chests in front of this door, and I clicked on the door after to make sure that it was inaccessible from this side. So all of the skeletons started to approach, but they're not going to be able to touch the door. And I didn't leave enough room for them to jump in between the door and the chests. So the only way for them to get to me would be to destroy or move the chests, but they can't move chests. So they just stood there attacking them. And on my turn, I just opened the door, took some shots, and then shut the door again so they couldn't do anything to fight back at all. This would have taken a really long time, but the Blood of Lathander mace lets me cast Sunbeam, and I just nuked 8 of them in a single blast. They have an ability that returns radiant damage, but the Blood of Lathander can bring me back to life once, so killing all of them downed me and then instantly brought me back, so I was able to finish the fight out without it taking too long. Moments later, I found myself in the exact same situation. It was literally the same fight in a different room, but I'd already used my Sunbeam spell, and I didn't want to have to fight that many skeletons again, so I decided to take out the Umbral Tremors before they got a chance to spawn too many skeletons. To take out the first one, I used the wand Second Marriage to summon a zombie Connor, and I ran it at the Umbral Tremor and attacked it. Then I just summoned a new one from outside of the combat range, and I told it once again to attack it. As long as it has the order to attack before it gets into combat, it'll finish running forward and make its hit. So I just kept summoning Connor over and over again till it was dead. Then I sent Astarion to do Scorching Ray on one of them, and it didn't put him into combat like I was expecting, so I just cast Firebolt over and over again to finish that one off. I used the same strategy to fire my crossbow at the one in the middle of the room, and a couple skeletons did end up getting spawned, but they weren't too hard to take out, wrapping the fight up nice and easy. I did a little exploring, and I came across a cloaker that was planning to ambush me, but succeeded at the perception check, so I didn't get absolutely slaughtered. I cast Sanctuary on my wizard, and I put my other characters up at high ground to shoot down at it, but the cloaker summoned a bunch of phantasms, which should have butchered me. I should have died in this fight, but for whatever reason, the phantasms decided to fly back down to my wizard, who can't be targeted because of the Sanctuary spell, and they all just turned and stared at my wizard for the entirety of the fight, while my other characters up on the ledge were just shooting and throwing spears down until we had killed the cloaker. I do not know why the AI decided to do this. If you know, tell me, because I was pretty baffled by this one. Sometimes I come across things when I'm trying to cheese games that I don't know why it happens, but it just does. And this is one of them. I listened to some of the comments you all left me, and I went and got the Misty Step boots from Nier, and I went and I got the Spectator in the bottle over in the Zentarim missing shipment. Regrettably, I forgot to go grab the rune powder barrel, and I also didn't go get the gem that works for the Necromancy of Thay book, which I feel like that one might come back to bite me in Act 3, but we'll see. Since I already had Nier's head, I went and brought it to the mushroom people, and I got a amulet that lets me increase my persuasion, so that's definitely going to help me out when I need to make difficult dialogue checks. I also spent a little while upgrading my gear. I went to the merchants and I bought all of the most expensive and best items that I could find. Then I went down to the gold that they have in their inventory and I split it by holding left shift and just dragging my mouse, and I just split it into a whole bunch of little bite-sized pieces so I could come back with Astarion and pickpocket all of the little tiny piles of gold without any trouble. First, I used Fog Cloud to make it so the NPCs couldn't see the merchant that I was pickpocketing, and I put it into turn-based mode so the cloud wouldn't go away, and then I just stole every single pile of gold back. It was really tedious to split the stacks that small, but I can't get my stats that much higher, so I can't really risk getting caught every single time I want to go do some pickpocketing. So I put in the effort, I split all the stacks up, and I stole every single one of them back to back. And pretty much anytime you see gear that I'm using that I got from a merchant, you should just assume I did this. I also start resetting a lot of the spells that I'm getting from items by traveling to Act 1 and then back to Act 2, and it just resets the spell completely. So if I use Fog Cloud to steal from a merchant and then travel to Act 1 and back to Act 2, I can use it again without needing to do a long rest. I decided to check out the House of Healing before getting back to the Gauntlet of Shar, so I jumped my main character down to talk to the surgeon. As a wizard, I had advantage on a persuasion check to convince the surgeon to volunteer to let his surgery assistants practice on him. And I managed to roll a 16, which got over the check by 4. So the surgeon laid down on the table and just let his surgery assistants kill him. So I didn't have to fight him, which was actually great because he had so much health. And I'm sure I could have found a way to kill him, but this video is to see if you can beat the game at level 1. And if my level 1 character can convince somebody to kill themselves, so be it. I'm happy with this outcome. I had to complete the Gauntlet of Shar. The first part was just a stealth check challenge. It was pretty easy, just snuck past a couple of shadows using turn-based mode. The combat challenge was a different story. There's a bunch of mirror images of my characters, and I'm only supposed to attack the mirror image of the character that I'm using. So Shadowheart is only supposed to attack mirror Shadowheart. I assumed that that meant they would apply the same treatment to me, which was very much not true. But they are weak to radiant damage, so I decided to have Shadowheart try to use Sunbeam to one-shot her mirror self, which she saved against the spell, so that didn't work out, and it ended very, very quickly after that. So I loaded up a previous save and stripped Shadowheart down so that she wasn't wearing any gear at all. I also encumbered her. I didn't know if this was going to work or not, and it didn't work, but I decided to give it a try. I sent her in alone this time, so it was only her inside of the challenge. And after I started the challenge, I put all of her gear back on and got rid of all the chests that were encumbering me and prepared to fight the Shadowheart mirror image. This time it was just a one-on-one fight, and the mirror Shadowheart didn't have any items equipped whatsoever, which made her a lot weaker, and she also didn't save against the spell, so I one-shot her with Sunbeam. She dropped a pretty cool item. I wonder if I could have gotten more items if I fought the rest of them, but it's no big deal. I'm gonna move on because that makes it easier. I reset all of my cooldowns by traveling to Act 1 and back to Act 2 before moving to the next challenge, which was the Leap of Faith. Since it was called the Leap of Faith, I used jump on Shadowheart, and then I just jumped her past all of, I guess there's a path or something maybe, I don't really know. I jumped over every single gap and I was done with this one pretty quick. Then I headed to the Silent Library, where there is an orb in the middle of the room that silences everybody, and that's actually not in my favor because my characters are kind of relying on the high level spells they get from their gear. So I took down the librarian from outside of the zone so I could avoid getting into combat. I just took shots at it from super far away until it was gone, and that got rid of the silence aura. I used minor illusion to group up as many of them as I could. A lot of them didn't respond to minor illusion at all, only 3 of them moved, but that did make it so that I was able to get a sunbeam hit on 4 of them. And that did pretty massive amounts of damage, but it did also kill Shadowheart because of the Radiant Retort ability they have, and then her mace brought her back to life. So that ability has already been used. The rest of this fight got messy. It got really messy. I had Lae'zel take one out with a spear throw, and then I had Astarion fire Scorching Ray to take another. So this fight's off to a really good start. 4 of my characters all alive against just 2 enemies, but that isn't going to matter when I'm level 1 because they do so much more damage than I have as my available health pool. All 3 of Lae'zel's party members got taken down in a very short amount of time, leaving it up to her to take on the rest of the fight. I decided it would be in my best interest to mostly run away and get a long-range spear throw to try and take out one of them, and I got so close, but he just needed a little bit more damage. So I ran away and left my down party members behind, and these skeletons were not messing around. They were just finishing them off left and right. But that actually is kind of a good thing, because if they had gone for Lae'zel, I probably would have lost. I would have needed to load a previous save. Lae'zel was in rage, so she only took half damage from the attack, and she was able to finish off the low health skeleton. Then I ran the rest of the way out so I could break line of sight, and the skeleton just went and finished off Astarion. I got a massive critical hit spear throw, but it wasn't enough damage to kill it, and as a result, the skeleton ran over and slaughtered my wizard as well. So all 3 party members are completely dead, but the skeleton is within range to die, so I decided not to risk it, and I used End Rage so that I could cast spells again, and then Lae'zel has a crossbow that's giving her magic missile, so I cast that to make sure that this thing was going to die and I would win the fight. Now I've got 3 dead party members, and I didn't want to use Revivify scrolls. I cannot say Revivify. I just can't do it when I'm recording videos. Anyways, I traveled to Act 1 and I traveled back to Act 2, and everybody's revived, all their items are reset, totally cheesy, love it. I got to go loot a little treasure room at the back of the library, and I got a good armor set for Shadowheart, as well as a spear that said it was going to be useful for the storyline. When I showed up to put all the Umbral gems into the place that they belonged, I found that I was missing 1, so I needed to keep exploring down here to figure out where that last gem was. And unfortunately, that last gem was being guarded by, basically a small army that was in ambush position ready to kill me. I don't really have enough explosives at this point to just like keep fighting everything and blowing everything up, and there are other strategies that I could use to try and cheese or clear this fight, but it gave me the option to try to persuade him to kill all of his followers, so I went with it, and I managed to get it to succeed. So he commanded all his followers to kill each other. Then it gave me the option to try to convince him to kill his displacer beast. I went with the dialogue option and I failed it by 2. So I decided to use a point of inspiration, and I managed to get it to succeed on my second try. He also seemed really sad about killing his displacer, and it made me feel sad, so I blurred out the footage. Then I had the final test, and it gave me the option to try to convince him to kill himself, and I really figured that this was going to be a hard check, so I brought Astarion over and used Bardic Inspiration on my wizard to give me the best possible chance of succeeding on this check. I should have also used that mushroom amulet, but I forgot. So I rolled the dice and I managed to get a 23, and when it was all done, I convinced this dude to kill all of them for me, so I didn't have to do it, and I consider that to be best case scenario.
That silver tongue of yours is dangerous. Can't believe you actually pulled that off.
Honestly, Shadowheart, I can't believe it either. We were finally at the entrance to Shadowfell, so we took the plunge to see what was laying in store for us. And we almost immediately came across Balthazar, who followed us in. I let Shadowheart take the lead in the conversation, and since I'm trying to make Act 2 about Shadowheart as much as possible, we're gonna have to fight this guy. About 2 seconds into the fight, I realized that this was not going to happen. I was definitely going to die on this attempt, and I was gonna have to reload a previous save and figure out what I'm going to do about it, because there are so many skeletons that he summons and they are spread out across the entire area. Even if it was just the skeletons and Balthazar wasn't fighting, I would still have trouble fighting them, especially if I fought fair. But I don't fight fair. I generally believe that there's always a way to cheese a fight, so it doesn't matter how outmatched it looks like I'm gonna be. I just assume that I'm going to be able to figure out some way to deal with it. I had two major takeaways from my first attempt. The first is that there's a lot of skeletons and they're really spread out, and that's a problem. And the second is that he has a potion of speed in his inventory and I need to make it so that it is not in his inventory. I noticed that I could move the piles of bones and that they seem to be spread out in the exact same amount that all of the skeletons he summoned were spread out. So logically, it seemed like he probably is summoning every one of those skeletons from these bones. And if I can move them, I can put all of them over on the edge in the same spot. If this worked, I would have every single skeleton grouped up in a single location, and that would make it so much easier to deal with them. So I put them all on the ledge, trapped by two chests and a smoke powder barrel. Then I took Shadowheart out of stealth, and since I had picked his pocket earlier, he was ready to fight immediately without any conversation, and he summoned all of his skeletons right there, trapped on the ledge, except that one pile of bones that was bugged and I couldn't move it earlier. So I had Shadowheart cast Firebolt and just exploded almost every single skeleton instantly. Two of the stronger, more healthy ones were still there, but I had my other party members come in with some attacks immediately, and we were able to finish them off before they had a chance to do anything in the fight. So we've dealt with every single skeleton but one, because his bones were bugged. From this point on, we're going to have to deal with Balthazar's main attack, which is Cloud Kill, a massive damaging spell that took down my party members every single time he cast it in a single hit. I sent Shadowheart up and used Sunbeam to take out that last skeleton and do damage to Balthazar before throwing a health potion over at my wizard and not clicking correctly and not getting it, so that was frustrating. Balthazar ran over and used Cloud Kill on Shadowheart next, and she only survived because the Blood of Lathander mace brought her back, and that can only happen once per fight, so that's been used up. Since I failed the health potion throw, I went ahead and used Healing Word to bring my wizard back to her feet. And then we started just launching attacks over at Balthazar as much as possible. And the rest of the fight is pretty much just going to be a battle of him slaughtering us in a single hit and me trying to get that person back up and then do damage as well. I also made a handful of mistakes where I grouped my party members too close to each other and he was able to get double kills, which was really not ideal, and I tried to avoid it after the first time it happened. But thankfully Lae'zel has Mass Healing Word from one of her items, so she was able to get them both back up on their feet. And I was just dropping every single spell I could, and this guy would not lose concentration on Cloud Kill. Every single time I hit him, concentration saving throw successful. I thought I had my party members spread out enough, but he managed to hit them both with just the edge of the spell on either side. So I used Misty Step to teleport my wizard over to Shadowheart, and I just helped her to her feet, and then I had Shadowheart use her bonus action to heal Astarion, get him back to his feet, and we just were having such a time. It was very difficult to keep anybody alive for any amount of time, and he just would not lose concentration on this spell. But finally, after burning pretty much every spell slot, using Healing Word as many times as I possibly could, he lost concentration on Cloud Kill and died the same turn. So there's that. So now it's time for Shadowheart to talk to the Night Song. And Shadowheart is supposed to kill the Night Song. That's what Shar wants her to do. But there's a persuasion check where I can try to get her to not do it. And I decided to throw everything that I had at this persuasion check. I was willing to use all 4 inspiration for it, but I actually got it on my first try, which was amazing because now Shadowheart can go down hopefully a path with more light in it rather than darkness. This ended up working out really well for me later in Act 2. In fact, I don't know if I would have been able to clear the final boss if I hadn't made this decision. I accidentally walked into an ambush where a bunch of Githyanki soldiers just kind of slaughtered me, so I reloaded to approach it a little bit more strategically, and I positioned my party members up on the roof. Then I had my wizard jump past where the ambush was to the waypoint, and I actually managed to get the ambush to spawn without attacking me or locking me into a conversation or anything. So I stacked up a bunch of explosive barrels and then used a series of minor illusion casts to get all of the Githyanki warriors to group up around my explosives. When I finally set the explosives off, I managed to kill everybody except for the boss lady, and she has a ton of health. I didn't even get put into combat when I exploded it, so she healed herself instantly, and I'm gonna have to take her on a different way. From up on the rooftop, I decided to use my second marriage wand to summon Connor the zombie to lure her a little bit closer to where my party was set up. It worked even better than expected because her Eldritch Blast has Repelling Blast, so she knocked Connor away and then moved forward to get closer again. So she was in range of all my party members and their bow, crossbow, hand crossbow, all the bow attacks. But she has 165 health, and we do not have that high of a chance to hit. So just having a good ambush position isn't going to cut it for this fight. Except that it kind of is going to cut it for this fight because I had my party members walk far enough away that they were able to just flee and go back to camp. Then I had them leave camp and walk back up and take another shot. They instantly got to take their turn again, so I walked them away after they were all done shooting, and we went back to camp, brought them back into the fight, took another shot. I had an infinite turn exploit set up perfectly where we were able to take as many turns as we wanted in round 1 of combat, and it never ended, so it took an absolutely insane amount of time to finish her off, but we did take her out, and Lae'zel even got inspired for killing a boss in the Shadow Curse lands in a single round of combat. It's time to assault Ketheric Thorm at Moonrise Tower, and I was able to recruit the level 8 druid Jaheira to my side and control her as a companion, which is going to be really, really helpful. I also spent a little time buying everything that looked good from their merchant and then stealing all of my gold back, so I got access to Fireball as a level 3 spell. I walked into the fight to see how it went, and I used a mage hand to shove one of their archers off the top and Lae'zel to shove another, and I had Jaheira in panther form attack the third one. Things got off to a bad start almost immediately when I tried to cast Fireball and it got counterspelled, and the gap of magic ability that my enemies have compared to me is really starting to become noticeable. I tried using an oil barrel and a fire wine barrel to start the fight off with an explosion on a bunch of the enemies that were grouped up, but it did not do enough damage to really be worthwhile, and most of the enemies were spread out so they didn't get hit. With Black Hole sucking all of my party members and my allies together, and then Hunger of Hadar doing tons of damage, it didn't go well. The fight went horribly. I was getting killed by reactions to my spell casts. I was getting destroyed in a single hit. Jaheira died. It was awful. The enemies seem way stronger than my allies that I have, and sometimes can even do a sequence of attacks that is just one-shotting them. So this is going to be kind of a nightmare fight. And I'm gonna need to find something that's gonna do some heavy lifting for me in this fight, because I'm not gonna be able to do it myself. And Mage Hand won't do it either, which is why I went and found some wheelbarrows. They were in the graveyard, so I stacked them up and started moving them over to Moonrise Tower. I had to get a little crafty at one point and put them up on top of a little street light and then throw them over. I had to actually throw them, like pick them up and throw them, because it wasn't letting me move them through this area. But anyways, I finally got them there, and I blocked the path to my allies with these 2 wheelbarrows, so you couldn't walk past without jumping. I made a second wall of chests and this chandelier behind my allies and made sure that there was no way to get in without jumping there. Then I used my Githyanki ability to summon an invisible mage hand and put the game into turn-based mode. I flew my invisible mage hand towards the fight and used minor illusion to get the enemies that were in the back room to move a little bit closer before casting darkness to blind all 8 of my allies in the fight. I started the fight by attacking with my mage hand, and it grouped the 2 combats together, so both rooms were all in a single fight. But if you look at the top, you'll notice that my allies allies are not a part of this fight. Since my allies are all blinded by the darkness spell, they aren't a part of this combat yet. And I flew my mage hand back to make sure that it put my wizard into the combat so that the darkness spell timer wouldn't just go down. Since my wizard was in the fight but far enough away that she seemed inaccessible, the enemies all started moving towards the barrier that I had set up with the wheelbarrows, but they weren't jumping over it. So all I had to do was end turn enough times in a row to get all of the enemies from both rooms to group up against my wheelbarrows, pretty tightly packed as well. Once I had everybody grouped up in one small area, I set up a bunch of smoke powder barrels. I had Astarion use Firebolt to blow them all to hell. A good start, but I'm not finished yet. I had Lae'zel use Magic Missile in order to bait out the counter spell so that I would be able to use a more important ability with Jaheira from up above, and I used Ice Storm on all of the rest of the enemies that were still alive down there, and pretty much killed off all of the big important enemies in a single go. Now, I do have some regrets. If I had known that all of the Harpers were going to be so useless to me in the boss fight at the end of the tower, I wouldn't have put as many explosive barrels down and saved as many. I thought that they would be able to go all the way up with me, but they just all stopped after this room, and I only had one of them die during the fight, and that really feels like a wasted resource. I think if more of them had died, then it would have been more of a perfect fight, and maybe like 2 less smoke powder barrels could have been used. I had Jaheira use her second Ice Storm spell slot on the enemy that was blocking the door that is leading up to Ketheric Thorm, and we took them out and we were ready to go to the boss fight. I saved the game because I was planning on having my first attempt just be a scouting mission to see what the fight was like. I tried to persuade Ketheric Thorm to redeem himself in hopes that I wouldn't have to do the fight, and even though I succeeded on the check by a lot, it didn't seem to make a difference and we were going to have to fight. Now, I know that I've used explosive barrels to get through a lot of fights, but there's something that you have to understand, which is that there's not an unlimited amount of explosive barrels, and I am starting to run low, so I can't just explode my way through every encounter. In fact, I've probably used too many as it is already, and I'm not going to have enough for Act 3. So I put my party members into sneak mode and sent them all out different directions so I could just see how the fight unfolds, hopefully getting my party members away far enough that they won't be discovered. Aelin got taken down almost immediately, but she has the Child of the Moon Maiden feature, which makes it so that she is immortal. She can't be permanently killed and always gets back up at the start of her turn. So my hope was that maybe there would be a way for me to use that. But my wizard got discovered and murdered, and that's when I noticed the door leading back down the tower. So I figured it was worth a shot. I jumped Shadowheart down to the door and I went back down and left the fight. This is good news. It means there's room for exploiting. I had Astarion go next, and thankfully he takes half fall damage, so he was able to make it even though he only had 2 HP. Lae'zel, on the other hand, only had 1 HP, but it was better to have her dead by the door than dead far away where I can't get to her. I had Shadowheart waiting, and I used the help action to get Lae'zel back on her feet, but it brought Shadowheart into the fight, so I was hoping that I would be able to have enough time to escape back inside. They also finished off my wizard, so she's dead. I had Jaheira sneaking around the outside of the tower, and I figured I would just put her out on one of the pedestals and just leave her for a while I watch and see what happens with the fight. Lae'zel gets knocked back down by a spell from one of the Necromites, and they try to go for Shadowheart next, but Shadowheart's mace blinded them right as they got in range, so I think they weren't able to cast the spell. So I got Lae'zel back on her feet for a second time, and we both escaped through the door, but that's when something strange happened. Even though Shadowheart had escaped the fight, she technically remained in it and was in turn-based mode in combat, even though the other 2 got taken out, and the first time that she left, she had been taken out. And this was a godsend. The fact that she is still in combat means that I can control her turn perfectly to be able to do hit and runs through the door. I moved Jaheira further away because she's not going to be necessary for this fight. I had Lae'zel and Astarion both use Shove on Shadowheart so that they would join the fight as well, and all of them are now able to go out the door, take a shot at an enemy, and then before their turn is over, they can go back through the door to safety where the enemy can't get to them at all. Just gonna drop a reminder here that I warned you at the beginning of the video that if you don't like cheesy gameplay, this isn't the video for you. I had all of my enemies exactly where I wanted them. They were all within reach of my ranged attacks right outside the doorway. But there was something that was going to cause that to change, which was a little bit unfortunate, and I needed to get ahead of it, which is that these necromites just somehow magically knew that Jaheira had gone all the way over to her tower. So I decided to move her towards the door in hopes that I could get her out, but kind of expecting that she would die. But at least she would die without luring all of the enemies away from our perfect positioning. The moment that I knew for sure she was dead was when I used all of her action points to end her right next to like a whole bunch of enemies, and only one of them was required. Ketheric Thorm just one-shot her. So unfortunately, she's dead, and I don't feel like that's my fault. They just magically knew, but if I'm gonna cheese the game, I guess they get to do it a little bit as well. It's only fair, right? We used some attacks to take out as many necromites as we could, and actually Aylin was getting back on her feet and shoving people off the tower, which was kind of hilarious. She was just working her way through them and getting taken down every time she was done going for a shove. But with enough necromites gone, Aylin actually was finally able to fly over to the main fight and yeeted one of the primary like spellcaster enemies off the ledge before she got absolutely dunked on by Ketheric Thorm again. I decided to try to use a revivify scroll on my wizard because I noticed that they kind of liked hovering near her corpse sometimes, and I thought, okay, well, maybe if I just get everybody down here, then the enemies will stay in range, because sometimes they were outside of my attack range, and that was frustrating. But trying to revive my wizard actually ended up making the game get like totally confused, and it just froze up and combat wouldn't progress anymore. So I had to go back to the save file right before I brought my wizard downstairs, and I let her just get killed again rather than bringing her to safety because it seemed like it was just breaking the combat. I wish I could say that my wizard's death was epic or something, but really my wizard just got absolutely annihilated in 2 hits. All of her health just gone. And of course Aylin gets taken down again, but she's got a little trick up her sleeve when she shoved the spider off the ledge, dealing 682 bludgeoning damage from falling. Even though she's only been taking bonus actions for the whole combat, she's actually been so clutch and so helpful. Ketheric Thorm can't be moved by anything, so you can't shove him off the tower, but literally everybody else was just getting shoved off constantly. And Aylin even managed to survive long enough. All of the attacks missed, and she got a critical strike on her opportunity attack against Ketheric Thorm. I'd been experimenting with all sorts of different things, leaving some people outside the door, keeping everybody in the door, pretty much anything that I could think of. I was just trying all sorts of stuff to see what I could do. But realistically, the way the fight was going to end was my characters were going to have to attack over and over and over again until we finally managed to get some hits, because we only have like a 10 to 20% chance to hit on any given attack. So it was pretty awful, but we finally managed to get Ketheric Thorm down below the health threshold where he runs like a coward from the might of our cheese. The game decided to cheese me back when it had the Harpers get mad at me for being in an unauthorized area in a tower that isn't theirs, but I got a nat 20 on the deception check, so I actually managed to get out of it. But man, that was pretty annoying that they were just willing to kill me because I was in a tower that doesn't belong to them. I went down for a much earned long rest, but then the games tried to cheese me again by using twice as many supplies as it should be using. I found these evidence chests that are invulnerable, and I was able to pick them up, so I know for a fact that's going to come in handy at some point. And I found the hole where I can jump down towards the Mind Flayer colony, but I forgot to use Featherfall, so there goes all the health from my long rest that I just did, so that's a bummer. And the game had one more cheese in mind for me, because I found a boat that said that I wouldn't be able to return, so I clicked Remain in Moonrise. I'm watching it right now as I do this voice audio. Remain in Moonrise, and the game takes me away from Moonrise. I don't know. I think the game was just freaking out because of the amount of cheesing that I had done, and it had no idea what was going on. So I had to reboot it because it was doing all sorts of weird stuff. But at least I found Last Light Inn because now there's more merchants that I can buy/steal things from. Definitely steal. I picked up a cloak that lets me make fog clouds when disengaging that I will be shocked if I don't find a good way to use that. All my characters cheese me one last time by stepping on a bunch of blast mines, but I wasn't recording when it happened because I didn't expect it to happen. But that's why their health is so low. So just a wild sequence of me getting railed by the game after being super mean to the game. But we went into the mine Flayer colony, one step closer to the big boss fight of Act 2. But first I'm gonna need to get these Nautiloid tanks because I need more explosives. Fortunately for me, there was a reusable restoration station in the Mine Flayer colony, which gives me the perfect excuse to go all out with my spells on everything that's on board this ship. I was firing off sunbeams, shooting fireballs, just doing literally every single big spell that I had to absolutely slaughter anything that was on this ship. It was really fun to be able to use all of my spells with no worries whatsoever about being conservative, because I could always get them back from the restoration station. My only regret here is that when I got to the really big fight with all the enemies, I fired off all of my best spells right at the beginning, and I later put a bunch of chests in front of the door and grouped them all up, but I didn't have any good area of effect spells to use on them anymore. They were all used up. So I did throw some holy water to just kind of see what that did, which was damage. It did damage, but I had a thunder wave that most of them saved against, but I just pretty much played Zombie Apocalypse Simulator for a while with my wall of chests and was just shooting all of the zombies in the head until I finally managed to take all of them out. And it was pretty amusing, but it did take a little bit longer than I was hoping. It was finally time, so I headed down the elevator with just my wizard so I could go scout the fight and sent them in to see what was going on. I tried using Minor Illusion on Ketheric Thorm and found that I could pull him out of position before the fight started. I also shuffled around in his pockets to see if he had any items he would use during the fight, but he just had a crumpled up note, so I stole it, but I don't think that's going to, severely hinder him during the fight. Once I was ready to start the fight for real, I headed over to where Aelin was because she somehow managed to get herself captured again, which is kind of annoying because she's supposed to be so powerful and whatever. But I noticed that the Soul Cage status effect could be removed with the help action, so I jumped over to her, I used the help action, and pretty much just got annihilated after that. I didn't actually see what hit me, but it looks like it was probably the Mind Flayer blasting me in the background when it was hitting Aelin, but it takes me out with a giant blast, and I was just looking at Aelin's stats to see if she had all the same stuff that she had in the last fight, and she did. She fired off a pretty big lunar blessing to do some damage, but it didn't really end up mattering, and the Mind Flayer came over and just ate my brains, I guess, so my wizard was dead, like a turn and a half into the fight, all done. Really, the joke's on him because my intelligence is 8. The only reason that I have more is because of the headband, so that brain is going to be useless for him. At this point in the fight, I decided to just leave my character dead on the ground and see what happened, and Aelin just started shoving people off the edge. Occasionally, she got an opportunity attack, and I just left her alone for long enough, and she took out all the intellect devourers and most of the necromites before getting into a repeating loop where she shoved the Mind Flayer off the edge over and over again, but it just appeared back up next to her. Once the combat was in a repeating loop, I sent Astarion down with all of my Nautiloid tanks and 2 fire wine barrels because I'm going to try to blow up Ketheric Thorm. Almost all of the explosives that I have that I'm using I got on the ship right here, so I don't feel like it's a huge loss to have 2 fire wine barrels in the mix. I got spotted by the enemies, but it put me into the combat queue with my turn coming up first, even though some of the enemies kept moving and taking some actions. I don't really know what that was about. I actually had to save and reload the game in order to move any of the barrels, but I got all the explosives into position and I cast Firebolt. With Ketheric Thorm at 6 health, I sent Lae'zel into the fight because she has Magic Missile, so I can guarantee that he goes down by just applying 2. I mean, I would have needed more than 2 to guarantee, but I trusted the dice. And that brought the fight into the next phase. And this is the phase that a lot of people were saying they didn't think I was going to be able to clear. And now that I've seen the fight, I completely understand why they would think that. Because quite frankly, I I don't think I should have been able to clear it, but I managed to find the perfect cheese. Astarion got butchered almost immediately, and Lae'zel wasn't going to last much longer either. I threw a caustic bulb at him, which ended up being a complete waste, completely not important at all. And the Mind Flayer flew up and extracted Lae'zel's brain, and 3 of my party members are dead on the ground. Something that I've noticed as a person who likes to cheese games is that a lot of the time, you don't end up cheesing things the way you expected to. A lot of the time, you can't predict the way that you're going to cheese a fight at all. You just have to poke and prod until you brute force your way into beating the game. And that's what happened here, because that fire surface that was created when I exploded Ketheric Thorm's human form isn't going to go away for the entire fight, and it just barely is counting as being underneath him, so he is in a fire surface. That means he's going to take 1d4 fire damage every single turn, as long as the fight keeps going. And since Aelin is immortal and can never actually be killed, the only way for this fight to end is for Ketheric Thorm to die. I kind of wish this was the end of Act 2 because I feel like that was a huge climax moment in the video and people are just going to start clicking off right now, but I have to keep going until I get the achievement on Steam. So there are actually 2 more challenging fights that I need to get past before I've officially beaten Act 2. And I had to get a little creative to beat the last fight of this video because I needed to protect an ally who insisted on getting hit by opportunity attacks as often as possible. It was kind of a nightmare. I went to Withers and had him revive my dead party members, and then I stole all of the money back from him because he doesn't care if you pickpocket him, so I'll keep the money. I can use it better than you can. I headed into an area that was going to be bitterly difficult for a party of my level. And back at camp, Aelin gave me a new spear that is going to let me cast Moonbeam, which is amazing. I have another high-level spell in my arsenal. But my party members were attacked in camp while we were trying to rest, and there was a portal that I needed to get to in order to survive, so I just had Lae'zel run there in one turn. So that's done. We're out of camp. And we need to go help the dream visitor that we've been having. So I sneak around all the fights because it looks like they will maybe be difficult and cost resources, and I don't want to spend any. So I headed over and I decided to have Shadowheart and Astarion go into the fight alone. Shadowheart opened by giving 2 extra AC to the Emperor, so he's harder to hit, and Astarion used haste to give him an extra action point each turn before I had them run away and go into sneak mode. Well, Shadowheart went into sneak mode. Astarion was actually out of action points. So what I did is I had my wizard throw an invisibility potion at him so that he would be safe and not die, so that haste would stay on the Emperor. And him having an extra action point is kind of a game changer because he tries to do everything that he can to die, which is frustrating. I managed to get Tasha's Hideous Laughter to hit on the boss enemy, but they get out of it the very next turn. The Emperor uses his first action to stun one of the enemies and the second one to extract their brain, which is kind of the game changer for this fight because honestly, he would have died to the 2 of those enemies. He almost dies to the one that's left. Meanwhile, my party needs to take care of the boss lady and 1 extra Githyanki, which is nasty because we're getting absolutely dumpstered in 1 hit by them. I used Healing Word to get Lae'zel back on her feet, and luckily for me, I still had a bonus action with a very high chance of success and shoved the boss lady into the void. I hope she didn't have good loot, but that was really the best case scenario for me. I also had Lae'zel go up onto high ground and keep chucking her spear down because I needed as much damage as possible on these attacks. And thankfully, I was able to take out the 2 enemies that I was responsible for killing. The spear throw just barely missed it, but my bonus action hand crossbow did the last point of damage. Meanwhile, the Mind Flayer almost lost his fight to just the 1 enemy. He's like almost dead, but he decides to come out with a massive chain lightning at the end. I don't know why he's been saving it for so long, but I finally managed to beat Act 2. I agreed to let the Emperor transform my wizard into an Illithid hybrid so I can get access to better powers with my tadpoles, and then I went to Withers and revived Astarion. When I finish Act 3, whether I succeed or fail, you should see it right here. Until then, one of my other videos are going to be there, and I think I'm going to work on some other videos for a while before coming back to this run, but I will finish it. I just might work on some other projects first.